as you came in, you got a copy of a classification key for different types of protists. Protists are one of the 6 kingdoms. So in this section of Unit 4, we've been talking about how to group things according to similarities. And then once we grouped them, how to give them names. So as you came in, you got a copy of a way to identify protists. Yesterday we talked about how to give a new organism a name. Now we're going to talk about how do you find that name. So in Journal 4.5, we're looking at someone who drank some lake water. Now at the beginning of the year, I think we mentioned the brain-eating amoeba. People who die because their brain actually gets broken down by amoebas. So there is a big concern that when you drink water that you aren't sure is pure, there could be these protists in them. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to identify these 3 protists. You have them on the page that you got as well. The page you got as you walked in also has a lot of descriptions of the characteristics. So for example, the word cilia. Well, your page tells you what cilia is. It tells you what flagella are. What we want to do is we want to be able to use a dichotomous key to figure out the name. Now, these aren't common names. These are scientific names, but they're actually only giving you one part of the scientific name. What you'll notice is that they're giving you the part that has a capital letter on it. So that's the first part of the scientific name, but don't write the word first here. I want you to go ahead and write the category name. So is that the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, or the species? Which part of the scientific name is this? Keeping in mind that the scientific name is that binomial name. That is just, we just call it by its last 2 names. So we're looking for what that part is. Then we want to look a little bit about what these organisms are. Why are we classifying these organisms? Why is it important to know about these? They're mostly unicellular, but you can usually see a nucleus. So remember, this will mean that they are all eukaryotic. Some are green, like they photosynthesize, but others aren't. Some can move, but others can't. And so they are all going to belong to, and if you look at the sheet you got as you came in, this is kingdom Protista. So we've got 6 kingdoms, and these all belong to kingdom Protista. Your opinion question here is it okay to drink lake water or pond water? If you're swimming and you swallow some, is that okay? Is it okay to drink it? What should you do? Are there any circumstances? Why would it be okay or not okay? So taking a second to really kind of think about why is that going to be important. Once you have finished completing the journal entry, one thing that you can do today for some extra credit is to work on figures 1 through 8 and using the dichotomous key to find their names. So figures 1 through 8, they give you a lot of information. They tell you the size and the shape. They tell you it has pseudopodia or not. So these are pretty straightforward. If we go to our journal entry and we wanted to identify this one, so what I would like for you to do in your journal is actually identify this one. We'll just call it number 1. It's on the 2nd page of your sheet. And so what we want to do is figure out, are there cilia? If there are, yes, we go to number 6. So it's like following a little map. It's kind of like following directions. And so today, we're going to talk about why are dichotomous keys important? What are they used for? And how will we see them perhaps in real life? As you kind of finish that up and wrap that up, you can pause the video, but we are going to go to our notes on page 93, I believe. Yep. So if you'll have your notes out to 93. Looks at, remember yesterday we talked about Carl Linnaeus and how he created a naming system called binomial nomenclature that has the genus and the species name. And there are these 7 different levels. We mainly refer to organisms like Ursus arctos, Homo sapien by their genus and species name. But we do want to kind of look at where did these names come from. So this basis for classification, how do we name? And we really want to name based on how related organisms are to each other. Just like your name kind of shows how related you are as well. So one of the things that we can look at is something called morphology. Morphology, morph, actually means shape. And so the shape or the physical characteristics. So for example, some animals, their heart only has 2 chambers, like a shark. But a mammal, our heart has 4 chambers. So this is kind of like when we talked about anatomy. So using morphology is actually going to help us figure out how related organisms are. So we can also write the word anatomy. Next we can look at more modern. This is kind of how classification started. But now that we have tools to look at DNA, this is actually, remember, one of the most reliable ways to tell if organisms have a relationship. So we can look at the biochemicals. We can mainly compare DNA and amino acid sequences. That's going to be the main example of biochemical. And we've talked about that a lot already. Embryology is going to look at development. So if we look at different organisms as they develop, we can actually see that they have certain things in common. So we can use how you develop to tell if we're related. And then we have something called phylogeny, and we're going to come back to phylogeny more tomorrow. It's going to describe the evolutionary relationship. So for example, remember when we talked about homologous and analogous structures, like wings and arms? Those structures can really help us tell which organisms are related. And so we're going to look tomorrow at what are called phylogenetic trees and how to really understand like a family tree that's based on evolution relationships. And so what we'll be doing tomorrow is creating some phylogenetic trees and learning how to read them. This is a visual representation of evolutionary relationships. And so this is a big part of classification, knowing which organisms are related to which other organisms. And that's how we really want to create the name. So for example, in the article you read about the fruit fly, making sure that the organism's name truly does represent them. So a lot of you told me that your name is part of you, part of your identity. It represents you. And we want the name of an organism, we want the name that we give it, to represent not just what it looks like, but to also represent how related it is to other organisms. Just like your last name does that for you. So we'll see these phylogenetic trees a little bit more. One is called a cladogram, and it really looks at the order in which certain traits came to be. So we'll examine these a lot more tomorrow, but we want to go ahead and know that these are all tools that we use for classification. So when we're trying to give an organism a name, like in the video you watched yesterday about this mystery organism, how do we give it a name? The journal entry from yesterday. How do we give those organisms names? We wait to give them a name, when we should, until we're sure of their relationship. So what we're going to focus on today is being able to actually identify an organism. It's called keying because it's called a dichotomous key. The prefix di is actually very similar to bi, and it means two. It actually means two different. So dichotomy means two different things. A dichotomous key uses two, so pairs mean two, statements and physical characteristics to determine an organism's name. And that's actually what we were doing at the beginning of class. We were looking at what is the organism's name. So for example, here we have 4 different insects, and if we wanted to figure out their name, we would follow this dichotomous key. So let's go through this example. This is an example that you have in your handbook as well. The most important thing is to always start at number 1. If you'll go ahead and make sure you write that in there. Even if you think you know the answer, you can't just skip ahead because there might be a problem here. So wings covered by an exoskeleton or wings not covered by an exoskeleton. So if we look at this first organism, you might know its name, but we need to make sure that we're being accurate and we're not just skipping ahead. So here the wings are not covered by anything. So 1B tells us to go to number 3. Wings point out from the side or wings point to the posterior of the body, right? Your posteriors are behind. So the wings of this organism point out to the side, and that is a dragonfly. And of course what we see here are common names, not scientific names. So the most important thing to remember is to always start at number 1. Don't just skip to the middle because you might end up making a mistake that could lead you to a different name. So if you will actually go ahead and turn to page 4O, we're going to use a dichotomous key and make a dichotomous key. So one of the things that we use dichotomous keys for is to identify organisms. This can be really important when we're looking at, for example, your health. Like if you were bitten by something, we want to know what you were bitten by. Was it a spider? Was it not a spider? So here we've got a scientific name. You're actually really curious if you got bitten by a tick. So of course we need common names to have an easy way to communicate with each other. But it turns out that you can get Lyme disease from ticks, a really serious disease, but only if it was a certain type of tick. So the medication and the treatment to prevent Lyme disease are really expensive. So we don't want to give you all that treatment if you weren't bitten by that type of tick. So anytime you were bitten by something, you actually want to try and save it so that you can bring it in and show your health professional and they can actually figure out what exactly you were bitten by. So if you look at page 4O or P, you're going to use the dichotomous key to identify certain arachnids or insects. And it gives you a little bit of background information. So this is a little bit challenging. This is why I'm going to ask you to work in partners. I'm going to ask the front row to turn around and work with the back row and so on and so forth. Because you're going to have to kind of read a little bit about arachnid anatomy. So for example, this is the abdomen. This is the cephalothorax. And so you probably need a partner to help you kind of process all of this. And here's your dichotomous key. It leads you to the common name, not the scientific name. We do really start with number 1. We can't just jump ahead to the size of the tail or the legs, because sometimes we'll end up at the wrong organism. So, which ones do you need to do? I would like for you to do B and E. B and and E are the two that I'm going to ask you to do. I'm sorry, B, E, and A. A, B, and E. So these three are the organisms that I'd like for you to do. Any other ones that you do are definitely going to be extra credit. So B, E, and A.